Puerto Rico is paradise, beaches, lush mountains, and a rich culture. But beneath the beauty, something is very wrong. In 2006, nearly 4 million people lived here. By 2100, it'll be 1 million. That is insane. Puerto Rico, a US territory but not a state, is the poorest, most unequal part of the United States, and it's in freefall. A 20-year economic crisis, austerity, hurricanes, earthquakes, and a pandemic hit the island hard. And instead of help rebuilding, Puerto Ricans got skyrocketing costs, privatized services, and mass displacement. But here's the thing, Puerto Rico isn't poor. It made American tycoons rich off sugar, then it became a shining star of development, one of the richest places in the Americas, the Caribbean's manufacturing powerhouse, pumping out life-saving medicines and medical equipment. But all that wealth was drained off the island. Since 2006, 15% of Puerto Ricans have left. Puerto Rico now has the 7th oldest population on Earth. The tax base is shrinking as young people flee while more and more people enter retirement. Puerto Rico's birth rate is the 7th lowest in the world. It's lower than Japan's. Nearly half the population lives below the poverty line. And despite paying more for electricity than anywhere else in the United States, rolling blackouts frequently plunge Puerto Rico into darkness for weeks, if not months at a time. In order to resolve its $123 billion debt since 2016, Puerto Rico hasn't even been ruled by its own government. An unelected fiscal control board, nicknamed La Junta, handpicked by the US president, calls the shots. And Puerto Ricans, despite being US citizens, can't vote for the president that appoints them. The local government has sold out the country as a paradise for the ultra-rich.
Dorado, Puerto Rico, and I bought this $16 million house.
Now, real estate tycoons, YouTubers, and crypto traders have flocked to the island in their thousands to live in a sunny US territory while paying no taxes. A Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans is arriving fast, and this is the story of how we got here.
The timeless surf pounds this Caribbean shoreline of what Christopher Columbus dubbed El Puerto Rico.
This is Puerto Rico, called Boriquen in the original Taino language, which is why Puerto Ricans call themselves Boricuas. Now you might be wondering why this island, all the way over here, is part of the United States. For over 400 years, Puerto Rico was a Spanish colony with no political autonomy.
Que Colón descubrió estas tierras, se apoderaron de las tierras que había aquí. Y no tan solo se apoderaron de la tierra, sino que esclavizaron a su verdadero dueño, a los indios. Pues se fue desarrollando la agricultura. Durante la época de España, aquí se desarrolló una gran industria del café, sobre todo, ¿no?
But by the late 1800s, things were changing. In 1897, growing anger with Spanish rule fueled independence movements in Cuba and Puerto Rico. Faced with mounting resistance, Spain finally caved, granting both islands limited self-rule with elected parliaments. Puerto Ricans finally got a taste of freedom. Just a few months later, the US declared war on Spain. Spain, which was an old, decrepit and dying empire, quickly lost the war, and in the 1898 Treaty of Paris, handed Puerto Rico, Guam and the Philippines to the United States, while Cuba became an independent country under strict American oversight. From that moment on, Puerto Rico would be an American colony, a valuable military outpost in the Caribbean. In Washington, lawmakers weren't exactly sure what to do with Puerto Rico. Should they grant it independence, make it a state, or keep it in limbo? Eventually, limbo won out, as American lawmakers didn't want to grant equal rights to savages addicted to headhunting and cannibalism. The Insular Cases, a series of Supreme Court rulings, cemented Puerto Rico's status as an unincorporated territory that belonged to, but was not part of, the United States. This allowed the US to rule over Puerto Rico without granting its people full constitutional rights. Puerto Rico was forbidden from negotiating trade treaties with foreign nations or setting its own taxes and tariffs. Puerto Ricans were subject to US taxation without representation in Congress. The island was forced into the US tariff system. There was now tariff-free trade between Puerto Rico and the United States, making Puerto Rican sugar highly profitable for American refiners, as it could enter the US tariff-free, unlike sugar from a foreign country like Cuba. But this destroyed Puerto Rico's other industries. The island's main export was coffee, grown by self-sufficient farmers who had exported their beans to Europe through Spain. But now its exports were subject to tariffs Europeans placed on US goods. Cheaper Brazilian beans rapidly took over the market, and Puerto Rican beans couldn't compete in the US market, which was already dominated by Brazil. Puerto Rico's coffee industry, once the fourth largest in the world, collapsed, along with the livelihoods of thousands of farmers. In 1900, the US appointed Charles Herbert Allen from Massachusetts as Puerto Rico's governor. As governor, he raised taxes on Puerto Ricans and denied them loans to develop their own industry, while subsidizing American-owned farms, and he handed over tons of government offices to high-paid Americans. Hurricane San Ciriaco devastated the island's coffee crop in 1899. A year later, Allen refused to distribute relief funds. Then, in 1900, the US brought in a property tax on the value of property. American banks decided the value of the property. American-owned land was appraised low, meaning those owners paid almost no tax. Puerto Rican farmers, well, their land was appraised high, and their tax bills exploded. The farmers, reeling from the hurricane and penniless, were forced to sell their land. And guess who bought that land on the cheap? American sugar companies. Governor Charles Herbert Allen spent just 17 months setting this all up in Puerto Rico. Then he resigned, and he went straight to Wall Street and started building a sugar empire. He and his business partners snatched up the very land he had helped seize from Puerto Rican farmers, and he got lots of help from all those men he had placed in positions of power. By 1920, Allen and US bankers had converted nearly half of all arable land in Puerto Rico into sugar plantations owned by American corporations. Thousands of once self-sufficient Puerto Rican farmers were kicked off their land. Now they worked as landless wage laborers, paid starvation wages on plantations on the land that they had been displaced from. While Wall Street made millions, sugarcane workers on the island earned just 75 cents a day, less than half of what they made under the Spanish. What was once land used to grow a diverse range of crops and food was transformed into a sugar monoculture for export. Hunger became rampant. By 1907, Charles Herbert Allen's American Sugar Refining Company was the largest sugar syndicate in the world. Today, it's called Domino Sugar. The profits from Puerto Rico's sugar industry flowed directly to the United States, with no reinvestment in the local economy. The work of Puerto Ricans helped to develop the US, while their home remained stagnant. Without capital, Puerto Ricans couldn't build their own industries. A local middle class never emerged, and the island remained economically stunted. This was a textbook colonial economy. Puerto Rico's entire economy was redirected to produce what it did not consume, sugar, and was forced to import everything else from its colonizer. The island existed solely to fuel American industry and to purchase American goods. As it was put in 1929, the American flag flies over a prosperous factory worked by slaves, who have lost their land and may soon lose their guitars and their songs. Puerto Rico is now a land of beggars and millionaires. In 1917, Puerto Ricans were granted US citizenship, but there was a catch. They couldn't vote in US elections, but they could be drafted just in time for the United States to enter the First World War. In 1920, the US imposed the Jones Act. It mandates that any goods shipped between two US ports must travel on vessels that are built in the US, owned by US citizens, and crewed by US residents. A ship can transport goods from Santiago, Chile to Miami, but if it wants to pick up more goods in Miami to bring to New York, which is the most economical thing to do, it would have to transfer everything to a US-owned ship. Puerto Rico is right next to major shipping routes. The logical way to get goods there would be for cargo ships to stop on their way to the mainland US, drop some stuff off, and pick up new stuff. But because of the Jones Act, ships dropped their goods off in Jacksonville, Florida. Then, 4 US shipping companies who monopolized this route and were convicted of price fixing jack up the prices before sending those goods to Puerto Rico. Shipping a container from the US East Coast to Puerto Rico on a Jones Act ship costs about $3,000. Shipping that same container to the Dominican Republic right next door on a non-Jones Act ship costs $1,500. The Jones Act inflates prices across the island, where people earn a third of the mainland wage. This also makes Puerto Rico's goods more expensive to export, making them less competitive. The Jones Act costs Puerto Rico $1.4 billion a year, and that might be a low estimate. The nearby US Virgin Islands are exempt from the Jones Act, and goods there cost half as much as in Puerto Rico. After the US systematically dismantled Puerto Rico's agricultural sector, the lush, green, fertile island now imports nearly all of its food from the United States. Food in Puerto Rico costs twice as much as it does in Florida, and now about 40% of Puerto Ricans are estimated to be food insecure, 4 times the national average. Now, you may be wondering, if this law is so bad, why doesn't the US Congress just repeal it? Well, lobbying groups for American shipping companies have a lot more influence over Congress than Puerto Ricans who have no political voice. During the 1930s and the 1940s, the United States brutally suppressed Puerto Rico's independence movement through massacres, the criminalization of the Puerto Rican flag, and the arrest of thousands of Puerto Ricans and the murder of independence leaders. To quell dissent, the US government collaborated with anti-independence groups to enact limited reforms.
In 1952, the colonial status was modified to become the Commonwealth, a free associated state. Under the Commonwealth, Puerto Ricans can elect their own legislature, but the laws passed in Puerto Rico can be overturned by the United States Congress.
These measures, though, did not grant real sovereignty. The island remained a US territory. It was not allowed to become a state, and they still couldn't vote in US elections, and they still can't today. After World War II, global sugar prices collapsed. Puerto Rico, one of the poorest places in the Caribbean, had to radically transform its economy. In the 1940s, they started Operation Bootstrap, eliminating all corporate taxes to encourage US investment in order to industrialize the island. This triggered a massive influx of American businesses that set up factories to benefit from extremely cheap Puerto Rican labor, with tariff-free access to the US market and no tax bill. Puerto Rico rapidly industrialized, turning into a hub for manufacturing garments, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, machinery, and electronics. Between 1950 and 1971, per capita income rose by over 400%. Illiteracy was largely eliminated, and life expectancy jumped from 46 years to 70 years. In 1976, the US Congress brought in Section 936, which allowed these US companies to repatriate all of their profits back to the US tax-free. Puerto Rico became one of the world's leading producers of pharmaceuticals and still is, generating billions in profits for American firms. But this industrial boom came at a terrible cost. American pharmaceutical companies use Puerto Rican women as test subjects for unapproved contraceptive drugs without their consent. At the same time, American eugenicists pushed for the mass sterilization of Puerto Rican women.
As part of a plan to reduce the population problem on the island.
By 1974, 1 in 3 Puerto Rican women had been sterilized, many against their will.
So common is the method that it is simply known as la operación.
What's wrong with sterilization and what has been wrong in the way it's been done in Puerto Rico is that very often women have not been informed.
42% of the women working in one factory outside San Juan were found to have been sterilized.
Puerto Rico had the highest sterilization rate in the world. Meanwhile, the island was poisoned for profit. Puerto Rico became riddled with over 500 Superfund sites. Superfunds are toxic sites filled with chemical waste. Companies like AbbVie, Merck, Pfizer, and Upjohn dumped toxic chemicals like carbon tetrachloride, chloroform, and acetonitril directly into the soil and water, while the US military used Puerto Rico as a testing site, leaving behind napalm, Agent Orange, and depleted uranium. Residents of the island of Vieques have a 20% higher cancer rate than the mainland US. children born near these Superfund sites suffer from higher rates of leukemia, seizures, learning disabilities, and neurological damage. Puerto Rico's transformation stunned the world. Countries like Ireland and Singapore looked at Puerto Rico's rapid industrialization and took notes. They studied how the island attracted foreign investment. They saw how manufacturing and tax incentives could fuel an economy. But there was one huge difference. Ireland and Singapore have sovereignty. They can control their own economic policies. As a colony, Puerto Rico couldn't. For example, they couldn't repeal the Jones Act to make themselves more competitive or to make prices on the island lower. Puerto Rico can't make trade deals with other independent countries. They can't even hire or lower the minimum wage because that's set by the US Congress. Ireland and Singapore kept much of the wealth they produced. They reinvested it to create better jobs, to improve infrastructure, and to develop new industries. Puerto Rico couldn't turn this system into genuine economic development. This system simply used Puerto Ricans as permanent, low-wage labor for US corporations, improving their global competitiveness. Since Puerto Rican firms didn't get the same tax benefits, they also couldn't compete with US firms. The profit created by Puerto Rican workers drained out to the United States. US corporations extracted $334 billion in profits between just 2008 and 2017. Puerto Rico is one of only 3 places in the world that lose more than 30% of the income generated within their territories. The other 2 are Equatorial Guinea and Iraq. In 1996, Bill Clinton and Congress ordered the phase-out of Puerto Rico's tax exemptions and set them to expire by 2006. Around the same time, the United States signed the NAFTA and CAFTA trade agreements. One of Puerto Rico's key advantages has always been that it has tariff-free access to the US market, but NAFTA and CAFTA extended tariff-free trade to other countries in the region with much lower wages, erasing Puerto Rico's competitive advantage. The impact was devastating. Thousands of factories closed and hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans were left jobless. The economy collapsed. Desperate to cut costs around 2009,
they've hiked sales taxes, corporate taxes, and income taxes. Utility rates are up dramatically. Some water bills have doubled. And to cut costs, government workers have been laid off, their retirement benefits cut sharply.
But these austerity measures weren't enough. The island simply didn't have the cash to continue to pay for basic services. Unlike an independent country, Puerto Rico, who uses the dollar, can't print more money. They can't restructure their economy, and they can't borrow money from international financial institutions like the IMF. Puerto Rico did, however, have bonds. Bonds are essentially an IOU sold to investors with a promise of repayment plus interest. Since 1917, Puerto Rican bonds have been unique. They are triple tax exempt, which means they have no federal, no state, and no local taxes, which makes them extremely attractive to investors. Even as Puerto Rico remained in a deep recession, Wall Street investors continued to buy more and more Puerto Rican bonds. They felt extremely secure in their investment because in 1984, the US Congress quietly passed a law that made it illegal for Puerto Rico to declare bankruptcy. Investors assumed that they would get paid no matter what. As the 2008 financial crisis hit, Puerto Rico's economy continued to nosedive, and the government issued more and more bonds just to cover basic expenses, and their debt was beginning to crush them. For example, in 2011, Puerto Rico sold $1.1 billion in bonds, of which $850 million was used to pay previous debts. In 2017, they raised their 7% sales tax to 11.5%, making it the highest sales tax in the United States. And every single cent of that tax went to paying debt. By 2017, Puerto Rico's debt had skyrocketed to $74 billion, or $123 billion, including pension obligations. Wall Street, knowing that Puerto Rico had limited options, was extremely predatory with the loans they offered. A huge chunk, about $37.8 billion, of that $74 billion debt came from capital appreciation bonds. These are essentially the payday loan version of bonds. The original principal on those loans was just $4.3 billion. The remaining $33.5 billion is pure interest. In 2014, Puerto Rican bonds were declared junk, and the island lost the ability to borrow any more money. In 2015, Puerto Rico tried to pass a law which would allow it to restructure its debt. The US Supreme Court struck that law down. And so the economy continued to crash. On June 28, 2015, a debt repayment bill of $58 million was due. Puerto Rico couldn't pay it. The governor was forced to publicly declare the debts are not payable.
And let me put this very clear. We are out of cash.
As Puerto Rico spiraled deeper into crisis, vulture funds swooped in. Vulture funds are firms that specialize in profiting off financial collapse. They buy a country's debt for pennies on the dollar from bondholders who have written it off as a loss. They then drag the indebted country into court, almost always in New York, to demand full repayment, squeezing massive returns from crippled economies. Vulture funds have infamously drained Greece, Argentina, the Congo, and other indebted countries of billions. The investor Paul Singer of Elliott Management, known as the Doomsday Investor, sued Argentina and won a 1,380% return on their original investment. In the war-torn Congo, in order to collect $10 million worth of debt that he bought, Singer started seizing about $400 million worth of the poor nation's assets. In Peru, in the year 2000, as their president Alberto Fujimori fled charges of corruption and human rights abuses, Paul Singer offered him a private plane to escape on, but first, he had to transfer $58 million from the nation's treasury to Singer, which he did. In 2015, Puerto Rico proposed the bill to the US Congress, asking them to allow some of their public corporations, like the island's power authority, to declare bankruptcy. This would give the island some breathing room by allowing it to restructure about a third of its debt. Even some of Puerto Rico's creditors agreed with this, thinking that it would free up some cash to pay back the rest of the debt. But the vultures wanted every last cent. These funds were already making huge donations to the Hillary Clinton, the Chris Christie, and the Marco Rubio presidential campaigns, alongside lobbying other politicians. The calls came in, and the bill died. After this, the vultures started buying up even more Puerto Rican debt. Forbes reported that in 2015, these vulture funds controlled nearly 50% of Puerto Rico's debt. In 2016, to ensure that creditors got paid, the US Congress passed PROMESA, which imposed on Puerto Rico a fiscal management and oversight board, an unelected, unaccountable board whose only mission was to get Puerto Rico back to repaying its debts and back into a position where it could borrow money. It's known locally as La Junta because the board has absolute power and can overrule any Puerto Rican law. La Junta's 7 members are handpicked by the US president with no input from Puerto Ricans. Despite being imposed by the US Congress, it is Puerto Ricans who will foot the $1.5 billion bill for La Junta. La Junta's executive director earns $625,000 a year, which is about 30 times the median Puerto Rican household income. Many of the people assigned to La Junta have connections to the financial world, many of whom helped to create the debt crisis in the first place. Now their job was to extract every last cent from working Puerto Ricans for the next 40 years. To ensure that Wall Street and the vultures got paid, La Junta imposed a brutal austerity program on Puerto Rico that hiked tolls, water and electricity costs, lowered the minimum wage, cut labor protections, and removed sick days, slashed education funding, which led to mass school closures, gutted pensions and healthcare, cut infrastructure funding, and restricted access to food assistance. Puerto Ricans already tried austerity in 2009 and 2010. It only made things worse, forcing more Puerto Ricans to leave to the US, shrinking the economy even further. The way out of economic decline tends to be growth and investment, not cuts. La Junta, however, insisted on driving down costs and prioritizing faster debt repayments, especially to vulture funds, all while Puerto Rico rotted away.
You have to evacuate, otherwise you're going to die.
Hurricane Maria, a Category 4 storm, winds of at least 155 miles.
Category 5 with sustained winds of
Hurricane Maria slamming
per hour.
the island, and as you heard, one official saying the island is destroyed.
I am begging anyone that can hear us to save us from dying. If anybody out there is listening to us,
This morning, harrowing accounts of survival are emerging after Hurricane Maria's devastating blow to Puerto Rico.
Roads, now rivers, homes demolished. 4 million residents here are without power. 100% of the island. Officials warn it could be months before electricity is restored.
Vino el viento, se llevó todo el zinc, se llevó la casa con toda la pertenencia, todo lo que había dentro.
The hurricane, they say, was a problem. The greater tragedy is the lack of government action.
There's a lot of old people here in Puerto Rico. They need help. You know, it's no, we can't let them die. We can't let them die.
I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack.
On the 20th of September 2017, Hurricane Maria slammed into Puerto Rico, burying entire towns. The island's infrastructure, crippled by years of austerity, collapsed. 500,000 homes were destroyed or damaged, and the entire power grid was destroyed. The federal government's response was slow and inept. President Trump refused to waive the Jones Act until the 28th of September, which delayed the response and increased costs.
So why hasn't the government issued a waiver for the so-called Jones Act, as it did to help Florida and Texas recover from hurricanes?
We have a lot of shippers and a lot of people people that work in the shipping industry that don't want the Jones Act lifted.
When it was finally waived, it was only for 10 days. 9 days after Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, FEMA had approved $141.8 million in aid. 9 days after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, FEMA had approved just $6.2 million. The United States was slow in deploying helicopters and hospital ships for weeks, while victims of the storm fought to survive one of the deadliest hurricanes in American history. Abandoned communities in Puerto Rico had no power, food, water, gas, or medicine. People were forced to drink water from toxic Superfund sites. Ordinary Puerto Ricans came together in brigades to clear roads, deliver food and water.
Along the way, we come across a caravan of more than 100 volunteers, all church members, who are traveling across the island distributing food and water.
Meanwhile, FEMA, the US military, and the local government failed to reach isolated communities for weeks. It took a full year to restore electricity to the entire island. 2 weeks after the disaster, President Donald Trump visited Puerto Rico and infamously tossed paper towels at hurricane victims. As thousands of Puerto Ricans were fighting for survival, he said, Puerto Ricans want everything done for them. After Hurricane Harvey, Trump told Texans,
To those Americans who have lost loved ones, all of America is grieving with you, and our hearts are joined with yours forever. We are here with you today. We are with you tomorrow, and we will be with you every single day after.
After Hurricane Maria, Trump tweeted at Puerto Ricans, his fellow Americans, we can't keep FEMA in Puerto Rico forever. FEMA usually stays in disaster areas for years. Trump said this just weeks after the disaster, while people were still searching for their missing loved ones. Hurricane Maria killed over 3,000 Puerto Ricans. The hurricane didn't kill most victims though. The deaths came from a systemic collapse that followed. Ambulances couldn't reach the injured, unsafe water made people sick, and communities went months without electricity to power medical equipment or safely store medicine like insulin. The vultures began to circle again. The firm Golden Tree bought millions in Puerto Rican debt for 15 cents on the dollar in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. They'll make about $160 million off that investment, which Puerto Ricans will pay for. After Hurricane Maria and the series of earthquakes in 2020, Puerto Ricans were just trying to survive. While they were distracted, La Junta moved to privatize all of Puerto Rico's public assets. Tolls, ferries, PREPA, which is the island's power authority, were all handed over to private corporations, with no vote, no oversight, but with massive price increases. In 2021, Luma Energy took over Puerto Rico's energy grid under a 15-year contract that required no investment from Luma, but required PREPA to pay Luma $125 million a year. Luma fired experienced workers, dismissed union contracts, and raised energy rates 7 times. Despite Puerto Ricans handing over hundreds of millions of dollars to Luma, outages are now longer and more frequent than they were under PREPA even after Hurricane Maria. Half of the island went dark on New Year's 2024, soon after a price increase. This is the price of electricity in the US over the last 10 years. This is Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans pay around double the US rate for electricity. This is a major obstacle to economic recovery. High electricity rates drive up business costs, they drain household incomes, and they make basic survival difficult.
Hace 8 meses que estamos sin luz, no tenemos agua, estamos prácticamente abandonados. Porque nadie ha venido a agencias de gobierno, no ha venido nadie. Necesitamos el servicio eléctrico porque yo soy asmático, mi hijo es asmático, ella es cardíaca, diabética, necesita la energía eléctrica para el medicamento, para la insulina.
Puerto Rico's energy grid is based on oil and gas, but the island has no oil or gas, forcing it to import fuel on expensive Jones Act ships. Solar and wind energy are abundant on the island. After Hurricane Maria, communities with solar power had electricity for months, while everyone else was in the dark.
We were extremely happy to learn the solar system in Casa Pueblo was intact. We were the only place in town with power, and we were able to be a source of energy for the community.
There is a massive movement on the island demanding to rebuild a grid based on renewables, which would create a more reliable and safer energy grid while reducing costs, creating jobs, and helping pay down the debt. As of 2025, only 7% of Puerto Rico's grid is renewable because importing oil and gas is far more profitable for American energy companies, so the grid is being rebuilt on the same expensive, unreliable fossil fuel system that has already failed. Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico's public education system, causing hundreds of millions in damage. After the storm, locals rushed to help clear away the debris and save books and equipment. Governor Ricardo Rosselló and La Junta rewarded them with massive layoffs and closures, shutting down over 670 schools. Only 800 schools remain open. Families were forced to move to closer schools, which were now overcrowded and underfunded. As Puerto Rico's public education system was dismantled, for-profit charter schools were forced on the island. Charter schools take on fewer disabled and poor students, they have lower graduation rates, and they force families into debt at much greater rates. Charter schools do, however, benefit people who own Puerto Rican debt. Apollo Education Group, a for-profit school corporation and target of many federal investigations, owns Puerto Rican debt. Puerto Rico's education system has been dismantled on an island where over 50% of children live in poverty, cutting Puerto Rico's future off at the knees, forcing many families that want a good education to leave the island. Unlike for-profit schools, the University of Puerto Rico has the best graduation rate on the island. With 64% of its students coming from low-income backgrounds, the UPR is vital in raising people into the middle class. Rather than rebuilding this crucial asset, La Junta slashed its budget by 50% and raised tuition by 300%. This despite the fact that research has shown that every $1 million invested in the university yielded a return of $1.6 million. Enrollment has plummeted, and fields critical to Puerto Rico's recovery, medicine, engineering, and law, were gutted. Its neurosurgery program lost accreditation due to a lack of funding. Puerto Rico used to have the best healthcare outcomes in Latin America. Its public healthcare was free to nearly everyone on the island. In 1993, the governor Pedro Rosselló privatized Puerto Rico's public healthcare system, much like how his son Ricardo Rosselló sold off Puerto Rico's education system. The results have been disastrous. Puerto Rico pays into Social Security and Medicare like any US state, but when it comes to healthcare funding, Puerto Rico receives a fraction of what US states receive. Insurance companies frequently refuse to reimburse already low-paid doctors. Puerto Rico pays to train specialists who then leave for better-paying jobs in the States. In 2009, there were 14,500 doctors on the island. Today, there are 9,000 to serve 3.2 million people. Puerto Ricans suffer higher rates of asthma, diabetes, heart disease, HIV/AIDS, and preterm births than any US state. Between 2001 and 2025, Puerto Rico's population shrank by 15%. By 2050, it's projected it will decline by 40%. hundreds of thousands of working-age adults gone, driven out by economic collapse, austerity, and rising costs. They leave because they have no choice. Puerto Rico is aging. Waiting rooms of underfunded clinics overflow with anxious seniors, and the few young people who stay behind struggle to find financial stability. They have fewer children than almost anywhere else on Earth. This shrinks the tax base, stunting any possible economic growth. More people of Puerto Rican descent live on the mainland US than on the island. Puerto Rican workers earn much less than their counterparts do in the States, despite a high cost of living and fewer federal benefits. Even after Bill Clinton's repeal of Section 936, Puerto Rico still offers massive tax breaks to corporations. Manufacturers, mostly big pharma companies, extracted $100 billion in tax breaks from 2017 to 2023. But now the government is begging the ultra-wealthy to come live on the island. A law, Act 60, offers wealthy Americans tax exemptions from federal and local taxes, capital gains tax, and taxes on passive income. This offer is not available to locals.
But crypto millionaires are flocking to Puerto Rico. That's because if you spend at least half the year on the island, you're free of taxes on capital gains. What a deal.
The result is that the ultra-rich have swooped down to Puerto Rico to buy cheap land from Puerto Ricans devastated by Hurricane Maria and years of austerity.
So we had a big hurricane in 2017, and that was amazing for the island.
Brock Pierce, crypto visionary and Bitcoin billionaire, relocates to Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria.
I only casually observed Brock Pierce's entry into Puerto Rico and claims that he was going to make it into a crypto utopia. But I'm well aware that the reason to go to Puerto Rico is for the tax benefits.
I'm clearly not here for those economic incentives. The stuff that I'm interested in are the things like helping Puerto Rico. I'm living a life in service.
This has created hyper-segregated communities of ultra-wealthy tax dodgers and the eroding of the Puerto Rico millions of normal, working people once loved. The purpose of Act 60 was to create jobs, but the result has only been a handful of cleaning, hospitality, and other low-paid, unstable jobs. Puerto Rico's beaches, legally public and open to all, are now being privatized by wealthy crypto investors, hedge fund managers, and real estate tycoons.
Locals say Aguadilla Pier Corp, the developer behind the construction site, has been building illegally on 3 areas near the cave, saying they've cut down a protected forest and let sediment from their site pollute the water below.
Locals are being pushed out by expensive hotels, short-term rentals like Airbnb, and foreign investors hoarding properties.
And while those Americans seek out a tax shelter in Puerto Rico, they're driving up the price of rent by 600%.
The infrastructure that failed with deadly results during Hurricane Maria is still desperately underfunded. Infrastructure continues to deteriorate while exclusive hotels spring up and billionaires demand docking space for mega yachts. In San Juan, where Puerto Ricans earn $30,000 a year on average, the median home listing is over $900,000.
I'm moving to Puerto Rico. So I feel like people are wondering why Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah.
Like how random.
Yeah.
Taxes. It's one vertical.
Yeah.
It's one.
Figures like Logan and Jake Paul have moved to the island to dodge taxes while abusing the local environment. Billionaire vulture fund investor John Paulson, who made billions off the 2008 financial crash and the collapse of Greece, and who owns millions in Puerto Rico's debt, is using Puerto Rico's distress to buy land and resort properties on the cheap.
Why did Paulson decide to buy up all this land?
It was cheap. Prices were plunging, so he could get it for pennies on the dollar.
The Puerto Rican government has used brutal force to crush any resistance to this scheme. Puerto Rico is now the 5th most unequal place on Earth. For centuries, Puerto Rico's wealth has been extracted, its labor exploited, its people sacrificed. It has been a tax haven for the rich, a testing ground for experiments, and a dumping ground for toxic industries. When Puerto Ricans demand independence, they are met with American bullets. They live as second-class citizens with no political power, pushed out of the homeland they clearly love. Today, under La Junta, Puerto Ricans have fewer rights, while people work multiple jobs just to survive, paying high taxes for crumbling infrastructure failing hospitals, and a vanishing education system. Rather than investing in Puerto Rico in finding ways to bring the displaced home, the government has brought in tax dodgers who price locals out of their own homes. This kind of parasitic exploitation will soon destroy its host. Puerto Rico is being emptied, erased, and auctioned off. Without change, we will watch something terrible happen in real time. A Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans. But you probably haven't heard much about this because the media rarely covers stories like this with the depth they deserve, which makes it hard to keep up with everything happening in the world. That's why Nebula is such a crucial space for creators. It allows series like War Room by Real Life Lore to exist, a monthly briefing that covers the most significant geopolitical updates, from ceasefire deals to conflicts in Myanmar, Syria, and beyond. Nebula even has an entire carefully curated news section to keep you updated. These kinds of series will almost certainly be suppressed on other platforms, but Nebula makes them possible. Nebula has a ton of exclusive and wide-ranging content, like The Logistics of X, which unpacks the complex systems that keep our world running, like how search and rescue teams operate. There's also Abolish Everything, a hilarious comedy debate show where champions roast pet peeves they want banned from society. Or dive into Red Atoms, an engrossing series by Real Time History that explores the Soviet nuclear program, its societal impact, and disasters like Chernobyl. Real Time History, one of my favorite history creators, releases all their videos early and ad-free on Nebula, just like myself and hundreds of other creators. Nebula is an independent, creator-owned streaming platform, a place where thoughtful, quality content thrives, free from the pressures of an ad-driven algorithm. Every subscription helps fund bigger and more ambitious projects that wouldn't be possible otherwise. It lets creators like me spend more time and effort producing the kinds of videos you love. Game shows like Jetlag, which take place over continents, or in-depth cultural analysis like Boomers are all made possible by Nebula subscribers. A subscription to Nebula costs just $36 a year. That's only $3 a month when you use my link, go.nebula.tv/cogito, or scan the QR code on screen. If you really want to invest in the long-term future of independent content, you can even grab a lifetime subscription for $300. If you're already using Nebula and you love it, we also offer guest passes so you can share your favorite content with friends and family. So if you believe in creators, if you want to support new, exciting productions, and you want to unlock some of the best independent content online, head over to go.nebula.tv/cogito. I really hope you enjoyed this video. A link to my Patreon is down below if you want to help support the channel. All patrons get early access to all videos and get to join a Discord server with me and other patrons. Sources I've used are also in the description.
IRS e-file is now open. Snap your W-2 and file your taxes 100% free. Plus, get your biggest refund. File free now. Roughly 37% of filers qualify. Simple Form 1040 returns only. Click for eligibility.
Ahora más es menos con Cox Internet y Cox Mobile. Desde Internet con el poder de fibra en casa hasta más confiabilidad 5G cuando estás fuera. Obtén Cox Internet por solo $35 al mes cuando agregas Cox Mobile. Haz clic para ahorrar.
It's easy to forget that the U.S. still has colonies. But we don't actually use the word colony. We prefer words like unincorporated territory or commonwealth. These are places where people are subject to U.S. rule but don't enjoy the full rights that other Americans do. I want to tell you about one of them, Puerto Rico. When you're in Puerto Rico, you're not just in a vacation paradise. You are in a part of the United States. It feels like the United States, but it also feels distinctly different. This feeling, this limbo state, didn't happen by accident. In fact, it's perhaps the best example of the lengths the United States has gone to hold on to land. So let me show you how the US kept their colony in the Caribbean, using brute force, spying, and the abuse of land and people. This is how the US stole Puerto Rico. Okay, so it's 1898, and the Spanish Empire looks like this. But it's faltering. A lot of its colonies are fighting for independence. The United States gets involved and allies with a lot of these independence fighters. They say they want to liberate these colonies, And so they get into the war and they win. But instead of liberating Spain's colonies, they just take them for themselves. And one of those colonies was Puerto Rico. And so on an ordinary Tuesday in the late 1800s, there was a quiet ceremony that takes place on the governor's balcony in San Juan. After 400 years of Spanish rule, Puerto Rico, this island in the Caribbean, is simply passed from one ruler to the next. And this begins an unprecedented experiment in the Caribbean for the United States, an operation to extract resources, money, labor, and military protection from this small, beautiful island. They start by passing a law that gives the U.S. total political control over the island. They start appointing American leaders to govern the island, men who don't speak Spanish, don't know anything about Puerto Rico or its people. Most of these leaders treat the assignment like a business venture. Like this one guy who, when he was the leader of Puerto Rico, starts to give public Puerto Rican funds to American-owned businesses on the island. Then he stacks the government with American loyalists. And then eventually he resigns, but then he returns to the island to build a sugar kingdom. Now with the help of all of the political officials that he had appointed, this company balloons into the largest global sugar business on earth.
And when it's domino, you're sure it's pure.
At the same time, U.S. banks descend on the island, giving out very predatory loans and then foreclosing on land, gobbling it up and turning it into, you guessed it, sugar farms. Puerto Rico is slowly turning into a sugar island and becoming more and more dependent on shipments from the mainland. The U.S. enacts a new policy that says that anything going into Puerto Rico has to be transported by American ships with American crews. So of course this skyrockets the prices for locals, which is made worse by the fact that the US government had devalued and then outlawed the local currency. So now every Puerto Rican lost almost half of their wealth overnight. And as a part of this push to lock Puerto Rico in as their colony, they forbid Spanish in schools and public institutions. And so in this very short amount of time, the US turned Spain's former colony into this giant sugar farm, stripping down local identity and language and culture in the process, and locking the people under their control. And then Congress gives Puerto Ricans US citizenship, which conveniently was just in time for a giant global war. So Puerto Rican men got sent to the front lines to fight for the country that was in the process of pillaging their island. By 1922, a series of Supreme Court cases had solidified Puerto Rico as a, quote, unincorporated territory, which is just like word salad for the US Constitution doesn't fully apply here. I mean, think about it, unincorporated territory, this intentionally contradictory jargon that came from these men hundreds of miles away. But honestly, the message was very clear. Puerto Ricans did not look or sound enough like Americans to actually be a part of the United States. By the 1930s, big banks owned 60% of these sugar farms, 80% of the tobacco farms, and 100% of the railroads and shipping facilities. At the same time, Puerto Ricans were being paid less than 4 cents an hour. If you put that into today's currency by inflation, that's like $1 an hour. Poverty and malnutrition start to grip this island. All the while, the US is turning the island into an essential military outpost. See how Puerto Rico juts out a little bit into the Caribbean? It served as a strategically positioned island to help protect trade routes and a place where you could refuel ships. Over time, more and more military bases and installations start to pop up on this island. The US would go on to test thousands of bombs in Puerto Rico, leaving behind one of the most hazardous waste sites in the United States. And by the middle of the 1900s, Puerto Rico really starts to mirror what the US envisioned. Puerto Rico, the sugar metropolis. Puerto Rico, the land of low wages and abundant laborers. Puerto Rico, the irreplaceable military outpost. The empire that billed themselves as the liberators from Spain is now an overlord, and the locals start fighting back. The fight is led by this guy, Pedro Albizu Campos. He's this poor kid who ends up going to Harvard. He graduates valedictorian from Harvard Law School. He serves the US in World War I and even helps draft Ireland's independence constitution. Like, the guy's kind of a superstar. Ultimately, he returns to his hometown to attempt the impossible, Puerto Rican independence. But soon, Campos would find himself bouncing in and out of prison for 25 years.
Cuando los adultos de la patria tienen que salir despavoridos de sus lares, no tienen siquiera salida a países extranjeros.
Got a cold? Gotta keep going? Gotta go with Alka-Seltzer Plus Severe Cold and Flu Medicine. It works. It's fast. It works fast. Fast cold and flu relief that quickly dissolves in water. When you gotta keep going, you gotta go with Alka-Seltzer Plus Effervescent Tablets. Don't have water available? Prefer a chewable? Try Alka-Seltzer Plus Cold and Flu Fizzy Chews. Use as directed.
Distinto del poder enemigo que nos oculta. Tienen que ir a Estados Unidos a ser los esclavos de los poderes económicos de los tiranos en nuestra patria.
Things haven't quite escalated. This movement is just starting. Campos comes back to Puerto Rico with the goal of total separation from the United States, and people join him. A lot of people, just everyday, ordinary Puerto Ricans who are fed up with being exploited. They join them, they organize, and they call themselves the Nationalists. They run for office, they go on strike, and they fight back against this superpower that has been exploiting them. Momentum begins to pick up. And then the dominoes really start to fall. There was this American doctor. His name is Cornelius Rhodes, and he went to Puerto Rico saying he's going to do like health research or something. We know what he really was doing and thinking because he wrote this letter. Let me read it to you. He writes that Puerto Ricans are, quote, beyond doubt, the dirtiest, laziest, and most degenerate and thievish race of men ever to have inhabited this sphere. And he goes on to say that it makes him sick to, quote, inhabit the same island with them. But he doesn't stop there. He says that Puerto Ricans need, quote, something to totally exterminate the entire population. And then he admits to a crime. He says, I have done my best to further the process of their extermination by killing off 8 and transplanting cancer into several more. I mean, this is bad. It's really bad. But for a lot of Puerto Ricans, this wasn't surprising. So the staff at the hospital find this letter and they send it around to everyone. And it goes out and it goes viral. And nothing happens to this guy who has admitted to murdering a bunch of Puerto Ricans. Actually, something does happen. He gets on the front cover of Time magazine. To the Nationalists, this letter confirms something that they already knew. It actually wasn't that surprising. There was an awareness that, yes, America loves Puerto Rico for their soil and their labor and their strategic location, but hates them as people. So after this letter, the movement explodes. It gets to the point where the US and their puppet government on the island can no longer ignore this movement. Soon, a bunch of new officers are hired and trained and armed with machine guns and tear gas. But the Nationalists keep fighting. Then, in 1935, police kill 4 Nationalists at a university event. The Nationalists retaliate by killing the police chief. Then, without trial, the police execute his killer and arrest Campos, the leader of the movement, for plotting to overthrow the government. Campos is given this rigged trial with a jury made up mostly of mainland Americans, and he gets sentenced to prison for 10 years. A few months later, people are out peacefully protesting on Palm Sunday, and the police start shooting into the crowd. Men, women, children, and elders are all clubbed and beaten to death and shot in the back as they run away. 19 are killed, and over 100 are wounded, but it still doesn't put down the movement. The violence only pours fuel on the fire. Back in Washington, D.C., they're starting to get worried that this independence movement is just going to keep building. And they don't want to give up their island in the Caribbean. There's still plenty of money to be made off of Puerto Rican soil and labor, not to mention the military bases that they had there. So they turn to an extreme measure, something that, as I learned about and as we reported on, has been blowing my mind in a way that I study this stuff a lot. I look at the behavior of empires. I look at how they control people. I've never seen this before. It starts with FBI agents who come to the island to work with the police of Puerto Rico. They have one simple mission: to spy on anyone who they deem politically subversive and to sabotage them, and thus sabotage the independence movement. So they spy on everyone. They spy on the Nationalists who are part of the movement, but also their friends, their partners, their sexual partners, their business colleagues, their children. They track down criminal records and mistresses and debtors and creditors and photos and license plate numbers, school transcripts, and even the guest list to weddings. Like, they got really detailed. They started listening in On phone calls and intercepting letters, everything was fair game. The idea was to create panopticon, this idea that they're always watching. They also started to cultivate relationships with a network of informers. Often the victim's family or friends or neighbors would get sucked into this state spying apparatus. The FBI uses payments and coercion and manipulation, which often forces people to turn on each other, causing divorce and broken friendship and fractured communities. Much of this was done undercover. Like these FBI agents would just be dressed in normal clothes, but would be constantly surveilling the people around them. Oh, and we know about this because they documented everything.
For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
If you were a person of interest, you probably had a file. All of these files, they're called the carpetas. Our story producer, Rafaela, went to San Juan to see the carpetas firsthand.
So I'm at the General Archive building in San Juan in Puerto Rico to see these secret surveillance documents that were collected on thousands of Puerto Ricans over so many decades.
After weeks of work, I finally got to look at las carpetas to see what was actually in these files. And it's kind of creepy, I have to say. You see specific times and dates and details from meetups, detailed descriptions of the locations where people are just meeting, all of the names of people involved, these subgroups that were potentially supporters of the independence movement. You get these highly detailed physical descriptions of the people that they were tracking, their occupation, the model of their car, their license plate number, and all of their moves, all of their activities, what they were doing, who they were supporting. And even for those who moved away from Puerto Rico, they continued to track them, knowing exactly what apartment they lived in the Bronx. They speculated about their nationalistic tendencies. And then you see these interviews that agents were having with people close to the target, where their personal beliefs are revealed, like one who thought that Puerto Rico would be repaired with socialism and independence. You can see a source telling these agents that they're afraid that their friend had become friends with the leaders of the independence movement and had been inducted in because of this friendship. And of course, these informants request that all this information they're spilling to the agents, quote, be kept secret. These agents would even interview family members. Like there's this whole transcript of the agents talking to the mother of someone who was suspected to be a part of the independence movement. Oh yeah, and in all of these documents, you see an obsession with who had guns. It's hard to overstate how exhaustive this spying effort was and how powerful it was. The FBI was able to use all of this information to intimidate and blackmail and punish suspected nationalists. I mean, there are thousands of these examples, from children being like kidnapped and put into a helicopter by the FBI to people being denied government jobs, all because they had a carpeta. At the end of the day, it was psychological war against Puerto Ricans who wanted independence, and it worked horrifically well in dividing these people and making them feel powerless because they were always being watched in their most personal of moments. Oh, and it wasn't just a couple of years. This lasted for decades. Eventually it gets to the point where Campos and the nationalists see no other way other than armed revolution. In the fall of 1950, the nationalists declare Puerto Rico as an independent nation. They attempt to seize towns, to set government buildings on fire, to cut phone lines. They try to assassinate the governor. And let's be honest, it's 1950. Like, the United States is easily the most powerful country to have ever existed. These people had no chance of winning against the newly crowned global superpower. Their goal was to bring attention to the world, to pressure the US to give up its colony. But instead, the United States responded by dropping bombs. The only time in the history of the United States where they bombed their own citizens. One survivor of the revolution was interviewed 5 years ago and said that it was a David against Goliath situation, and that their leader told them that they might die, but but that they might succeed. But that at least they would have let the world know about Puerto Rico. During this revolution, many of the fighters wore their Sunday best, ironed suits and pressed ties, because they knew they would die. They had a cause they were fighting for. In the end, 24 are killed. Puerto Rico really didn't have a chance. President Truman comes out and is sort of like, there was an incident in Puerto Rico, sort of downplays it. And a couple days later, 2 nationalists attempt to assassinate him. The world doesn't come to Puerto Rico's rescue, and instead, the police carry out a mass arrest, throwing 3,000 people in jail. A few years later, 4 nationalists opened fire in the chamber of the U.S. Congress. Campos is arrested again, and this time he's sentenced to 80 years in prison. There's evidence that during this time in prison, Campos was exposed to extreme levels of radiation. The consequences allegedly gave him a stroke and left him paralyzed and unable to speak. And in the end, the U.S.'s wish came true. They silenced Campos for good. After the squashing of the revolution, the surveillance program continued for decades. In the end, it was a total of 50 years of state-sanctioned spying on the people of Puerto Rico. When it all came to light, they estimated that around 100,000 people had files. A lot of people in Puerto Rico knew that this was happening, but they just knew it in their gut. They didn't have any real evidence of it. They didn't realize the sheer scale, the methodical approach that the FBI was taking to spy on them and to divide them and to psychologically debase them. In total, it was 1.8 million pages of documentation. And many of the victims of this spying are still alive today. I think the carpetas are a really powerful signal of how the US kept its colony in the Caribbean. They were the cementing of what the US had done from the beginning, which is create a system of reliance and oppression.
You're about to be entrusted with top secret information.
Right now, you can get Disney Plus and Hulu for just $2.99 a month.
Just one of those days, I guess.
Your favorites from Disney Plus and Hulu together on Disney Plus for just $2.99 a month.
This is serious.
Is something distracting you?
That is beautiful.
For a limited time, get Disney Plus and Hulu for just $2.99 a month for 4 months.
La miel picante favorita de América se une al original pollo americano. KFC está para chuparse aún más los dedos.
Where people lived and died under the thumb of this massive superpower that was exerting very, very aggressive control over these people who were American citizens. It's hard to fully understand and impossible to relate to the psychological impact that this program would have on the people that it affected, but also the generations who came from the people who it affected. Imagine such a pervasive force that was sowing division, mistrust, betrayal, and fear, not just of the government, but of each other. Puerto Rico never got independence. And to this day, they remain an unincorporated territory, which means that they don't have the same rights as other American citizens. And the status of the island is a heated debate. Many Puerto Ricans value the modern-day benefits of being connected to the U.S., but at what cost? This is backlit by the U.S.'s lasting control over the island. And even though the people of Puerto Rico served in our armed forces, they still can't vote for the president. They still don't have full representation in our democracy. And yet, Puerto Rico still has this immense impact on American culture and life. The food, the music, the dance, the art from this island, it's a part of what it means to be American. And yet, I think most of us don't really think about the status of this place very often, or its history. It's only when there's like a hurricane on this island, and we see the US kind of barely show up relative to how they show up for their other citizens. Only then are we reminded that Puerto Rico is a colonial possession, one taken in war and exploited through predatory and racist policies, and then held on to through a massive amount of state force, spying, violence, and repression. And what we're left with is yet another example of a place whose vibrant spirit and culture and people are somehow able to shine through the dark fog of colonial abuse that has left deep wounds on this island.